Hey everybody, I am here today finally with Kerri Hupp. Kerri is a West Texas native. She's lived in DFW since college. Woo! She spent the first 20 years of her career in buying and marketing roles with large DFW-based corporate offices. But in 2018, she left corporate America to join a local foster care nonprofit. Yay! Where she still serves in leadership, overseeing marketing and business planning. In 2020, Kerri co-founded Living Beautiful Decorating. And I'm so glad that you are a business owner, something that I'm passionate about. Their mission is to deliver simple beauty to spaces through attainable decorating services. Kerri is a single mom to a 9-year-old boy, God help you. And she volunteers at Life Church in Mansfield. So Kerri, thank you so much for being here today with my tech challenged self. I wanted to have you on because you have so much wisdom, first of all, and I am so glad that you started your blog. And I actually don't even know if I mentioned that, but I wanted to ask you what led you there, like what led you to open up and to start sharing all the nuggets of wisdom that you have, but also what led you to open up your life more.
Yeah. I wish that being open and vulnerable had just been a theme for me. I wish that was something, and it's honestly something I grieve now, that I went so much of my life being just very private. And I don't know where I got that that's the way you should live your life. I was just super protective of, in my professional life, keeping my personal life very separate. And I think a lot of it, Lali, is that I attributed emotions and vulnerability to weakness. And I remember a marked moment as a little girl having an encounter where I just kind of shut down in response to something my parents said, and they didn't say anything wrong. It was the way I interpreted it. And I made a conscious decision that I was no longer going to show emotions and that they were weak. I sort of started living my life that way. And the problem is, and I think that's the struggle a lot of women have, is that you are rewarded professionally for keeping those things inside.
Yeah.
So I really prospered and thrived because I was the girl that never had drama. You could have a really tough conversation with me at work and I could take it. It doesn't mean that it was productive, because there's probably things the person talking to me needed to say and be heard in a different way, but we were going to solve the problem. And it wasn't until I went through my divorce in 2017 and that God pulled at the thread of everything I found security in, and control over my emotions was one of those. And I just, out of desperation, said, God, okay, if not this, then what is my life supposed to look like? And in my mind, I thought that meant, okay, if I'm not going to be married to this person, what would you have me do? Which sort of started a lot of the professional changes that you mentioned, and my ultimately starting a business. But what really happened, the deeper thread that he unraveled, was the vulnerability that needs to be at the heart of us just as humans. We need to connect in that way. I mean, look at Jesus's life and how vulnerable he was with strangers, not just his disciples. And that the thread of that is love. There's love in there. And the biggest thing that was going to come out of all of this heartache was really going to be, others need to hear your story. They need to know, number one, that they're not alone, which we've seen obviously in 2020 is so important. People need to know they're not alone. This sounds a little callous, but they also need to know they're not going to die from it. I mean, there were moments in my divorce I really thought I was going to die. Things hurt so bad and you don't know what to do with the pain. And if you're not talking to someone or hearing from someone who's telling you, I've lived through this, you're going to be okay, people have to see that. And this isolation has just been so bad on so many levels for so many people. But and one of the things that I've come to uncover, which was a little hard and a little humbling, is that sometimes your experiences aren't even for you. Sometimes they're entirely for someone else. And I'm not saying that God brings these horrible things on you, but sometimes the why is someone else needs to hear whatever it is that you have to say. So I had always been received compliments and accolades for my writing, but it was usually technical in nature. I'm really good at writing resumes and talking about things and processes and procedures. And here and there, I would feel compelled to write a little bit more from the heart. It was usually after a tragedy. If I lost a family member, when I lost my father. But the consistent theme through my journey since 2017, really 2016, is that I really just do whatever God tells me to do. And I've been pretty, I could say I've gotten to the point that I'm pretty timely in that obedience, which I think is so important. I think we walk in a different level of favor when we respond in a timely way. But the blog thing was different. I kept fighting him on it. I think because I thought, I don't know, this isn't that interesting. If people want to know about me, I'll gladly talk to them in a one-on-one setting, which I had gotten a lot more comfortable with doing. But putting it out on the web and writing about your feelings and in full transparency, even leaving it out there for others to see whose interpretation of the details is very different than mine. My divorce being a big one of them. There are people who don't agree with my take on how things went or how I've grown, and so opening myself up to that criticism was also a little bit scary, but really just the vulnerability of it. But it was a pervasive question and of the Lord of me, and so I just did it. And I really just kind of, as I feel like he prompts me to write something, I just write it. I'm not on a schedule. But if I feel like a theme is consistent enough, I'm hearing the same thing kind of over and over again, I think if it's a message I need right now, maybe there's other people that need it too.
Yeah. I'm so glad that you started the blog. I know that I'm benefiting from it, and so I'm grateful. And you touched on this, and I thought, oh, this is something that I really wanted to hear more of. If you want to share a little bit about how you walked through the journey of grief when you lost your dad. I'm interested in just hearing any of that process, because I think so many of us, especially in the West, are taught to just stuff our emotions and not, I shouldn't have said in the West because we do it in the East too. But we stuff our emotions and then just externally move forward, but we haven't really faced or even acknowledged what's happening on the inside. And so how did you begin to process a little, I know it could take forever, but a little bit of how you started processing your grief?
Well, his situation was a unique one. He had kind of another life before he and my mother got married. And that whole revelation, we knew about it when I was about 10 years old. They decided to share that I had a half sister that existed. And we kind of never talked about it again. In my house, we just didn't talk about things like that. And there wasn't, for me, there was a perceived, we didn't have, I perceived that we didn't have permission to have those discussions with our parents. Again, I don't know that that's a message they sent or one I just decided on my own was the truth. So when my father passed, I'm the oldest child of 3. My mother was losing her husband of 40 years. So I sort of stepped in and took over logistics. And part of that was facilitating getting that side of his family to come see him on his deathbed, because they had not seen him ever. And we are meeting them for the first time as well. So the whole thing was incredibly emotional, incredibly complicated. It's a lot of forgiveness that needed to be worked through on their part for my father. And I needed to forgive my father for the decisions that he made based on what he thought was best for his daughter at the time. I think we can all agree it was a terrible choice. And so after he was gone and the dust settled, then my marriage started falling apart. And I don't really think I started even really trying to grieve it until maybe 2 years ago. So that would be 3 years after he died. I didn't really have the bandwidth. There was so much I was working through with my marriage, but what had happened is I had started lumping all of it together, and this is how grief works. We internalize it until it grows into this completely different thing than it originally started as. And for that, it became, I lumped together men leave. So my father basically abandoned his first daughter. Then he left this earth. My husband left. Some other things we're working on behind the scenes, and it grew into this beast. And I do think it's important to know yourself well enough to know, and a lot of this just comes through prayer and relationship with the Lord, knowing what you need to work through, when you need to work through it, because that, if enough time goes by, the grief starts to feed off of itself, but it also starts to feed off of everything else that's happening in your life. So you have just like this cancer seed growing in you that now needs full-blown chemo and radiation. And 2 years ago could have, I mean, losing your father is a big deal, but it could have been worked through very differently. I will say God used that to help me forgive lots of people and lots of things. And he also used my forgiving my father to unravel all the misconceptions I had about Jesus and God, because of that very authoritarian home that I lived in and the lack of relationship and my deciding that emotions were weak. I had zero friendship with Christ. So once I was able to grieve the loss of my father and let go of how I had misplaced my father's, the relationship I had with my father on to God, which we all do. That's a very common theme. He used it to unfold just the most beautiful, wonderful love story. And I mean, I was talking with a girlfriend about this last night. It isn't often that I can say that I celebrate devastation like that. I'm pretty good at celebrating the good that God does after the fact, but I am not one who counts it all pure joy.
Right.
I want to be more like that. And in this situation, I can now look back and say, and my father was ready to go. He was a very firm Christian, and he was a very much more tenderhearted man when he left this earth. So he had reconciled what he needed to reconcile. But it can be such a beautiful, beautiful thing if you will lean into it, because what we know is that God is close to the brokenhearted. So I have to believe there's a special tenderness when God is walking alongside you, and he also delivers this sense of expectancy because he knows what's coming on the other side. It's already there. He's just walking you through the pain to get you to this other thing. So if you can lean into him and find that sense of expectation or expectancy, not expectation, it's so beautiful. It's so, so incredibly beautiful. So I think grief and the process of working through grief with Christ, not on your own, I don't know how anyone does this on their own. I truly don't. And others. I was seeking professional counseling and talking to other people and all of those things as well. Is so beautiful. So if you can see it for that, and it's very, very hard to see in the middle of it, um, it will completely change your life.
That's such a good reminder. This morning, I just saw some art that my cousin did for me, and it just says, find joy in the journey.
Mhm.
So that's such a good reminder, because I don't know that many of us really count it all pure joy. I don't know that we do that. But thank you for sharing that. The other thing that I wanted to ask you is what led you into interior design? You do that so well. I've seen your work. So what led you down that path?
Such a simple question and such a complicated answer. So I've shared a little bit about what happened after my divorce, and that's really where, again, I just pulled at the thread and everything came undone. And so once I started asking God, if not this, then what? Um, he knows me well enough. I mean, he made me, right? So he knows that I need to be really baby stepped through things. And so in 2018, well, I'll start before that. So I'm a, when I commit to something, I'm there for life. Like I'm a stayer. I don't like a lot of change. So if I go to a job, I plan to be there a decade. And my church was one of those things too. They were my family during my divorce. They came over the middle of the night, fought for our marriage. So they were my support system. And I started hearing God say, it's time to leave your church. And I thought that's the word that always came to mind anytime that I assigned something to something crazy I felt like God asked me to do was the word reckless. I said, that seems reckless. That doesn't seem wise. But it was consistent enough that I eventually ended up leaving my church. And what happened when I went to the new church, again, I decided I'm going to be here forever. This is going to be our new home. It's a fresh start. But I became connected to the foster care nonprofit that you mentioned. And it really was what it turned out to be was God refining sort of these entrepreneurial skill sets. So they needed and I was doing this unpaid, so it was a huge financial leap. They needed help building a new website, taking them through rebranding, business planning, and while I was there, they ended up moving into a new facility. So it's a foster care warehouse that provides essentials to foster and adoptive families. So they were moving into a newer, larger facility. And I had the opportunity to decorate the facility based on sort of this new branding. I said, we need to look like who we are. So I was decorating and working, and the executive director said, you're really good at this other stuff, the marketing, the business planning, but you come alive when you decorate. You are like in a zone. And the history leading up to that is I had always enjoyed decorating. I did it behind the scenes. I did it in my home. But anytime anyone ever suggested I do it professionally, I always said, I want to protect it as a hobby and I don't want to go back to school. Those were my two excuses. And I was also doing really well in my other job. So why would I change? So she says this, and about 9 months go by, I'm at this nonprofit and I'm still not getting paid. So now I've got to make some decisions about work and what I want to do. So I'm starting to go back to interviewing for jobs. And Lali, I would drive to these jobs and job interviews, and I'm just crying, weeping, knowing with every fiber of my being that this is not right. This isn't what God wants for me. But I was even being prayerful before the interviews, though. I was like, do you want me to go? Like, what should I be doing? And I always felt like the answer was yes, go ahead and go. Well, on the other side of that, I realized sometimes he steps us through those things to show us what is not for us. Mm-hmm. Had I not gone on those interviews, I think I always would have asked myself, did I make a mistake in not going? How do I know that I really made the right choice? So for me, that's the way God needed to step it through me, because I knew with 100% certainty after that, that's not what I was supposed to do. So God then says, well, no, I'm having lunch with a girlfriend who is a dreamer. And she was talking about all these business ideas she had and just kind of casually, I said, tell me about your favorite one. And she said, well, it's this design business founded on the principle of Ecclesiastes 3:11 and things becoming beautiful in their perfect time. And it's simple. It's not like typical Dallas reconstruction. It's just we're kind of in and out, quick beauty. And I felt something kind of bubbling up inside me, and I just felt sick, like in a good way. So I got in the car, and I do a lot of talking to God in the car, and I started yelling, I was like, what? No, and I yelled, I'm not an entrepreneur. I work for entrepreneurs and I do a good job. And I mean, you've seen me, you've seen the work I can do. And as quickly as I said the words, I heard God say, that's not who I said you are. You decided that you were not a risk taker. You decided you were not an entrepreneur. You decided you were quiet and shy and all of these things that you have labeled yourself. I never said those things about you. Let me show you who you really are. And that's sort of what has happened with the blog too. Just, you look to me, I'll tell you who you are. So September, it was like 2 days ago, the 9th of 2019, she and I sat down and I started reading Business Boutique by Christy Wright, who works alongside Dave Ramsey. And for anyone who's interested in starting a business, read this book. I was crying like the first 5 pages in because it taps into all those lies we believe about how there's not space for us and really getting to the why. And so we did like a soft launch on social media last September and just kind of said, hey, we're dipping our toe in the water. And really it was me because she's still working full time. So I'm just figuring it out as I go. And the response was crazy, like crazy. Just, I mean, the people who had just been waiting and encouraging me to do this for forever. And so since then, God told me to sell my house because I was really clinging to my house as the last piece of my former life, but also safety for my son, who was adopted from foster care, and he really, really doesn't like change. So I was trying to keep everything safe and simple for him, and that was sort of the last God saying, don't cling to this. And so he's really used the finances from that to sustain me since I've made this big leap. We're now, a few months ago, I felt like he told us to move to another town. So we've since moved. We're like in a rent house, which is super uncomfortable for me, but we're set up perfectly for God to do whatever he wants to do. And we've officially launched the website. So I learned how to build a website before, so I was able to do it again. I'm just figuring it out as I go, which is so not like me. I'm a planner, but it has been the most, I mean, when I have finished the few jobs that I've completed, I just stand and weep. It's when you're doing what you're supposed to do and you're connected to your creator that way, because he's the one that put this in me, there's no other feeling in the world. And I'm still being cautious about clinging to this for forever because his purposes are seasonal. Some things that we need to be doing all the time, obviously, but these things are seasonal too. So I'll do this until he tells me to do something else. But for now, it's just opened my heart, and the creativity that it's opened in me, I had really squelched because I'm such a pragmatic, practical girl. That's where the doing it as a hobby was fueling me. But now he's letting me do it as work. And I mean, with everything going on in the world right now, obviously I've questioned whether or not it's the right thing or the right time, but it's just been so thrilling and so exciting. And I don't know how it's going to end out, but I know it's his business, and we are very intentionally building this as his business. My dream is that he will have a physical office at our business, and the plans are his, so they will succeed.
Yeah.
All that I know today.
That's very cool. I think that there are several people who need to hear that
Mm,
story, that journey. In
mm,
fact, I was wondering what you would say to someone who is on the edge,
mm,
needs encouragement, whether it's stepping into self-employment, whether it's facing grief and walking through. And I
mm,
don't mean just the grief of death. You know, there's so many small griefs that we
mm,
don't name, and like you said, it becomes something else.
mm.
Um, or a major personal transition. Like, what encouragement would you have for someone that is where you used to be?
Yeah. So the thing that compels me now, really to do anything that the Lord asked us to do. So usually something like that would be prompted for me, at least, from guidance from Him. Um, is that it's this knowledge of knowing that we will all at some point stand in front of Him and give an account for the gifts and the truths that we had. So if He has planted this seed to start a business, or He is compelling you to work through grief and forgive someone and make amends, and you are not doing it, this is not intended to instill fear. But I want everyone to have a sense of urgency in knowing that the person that loves you more than anything in the world will talk to you someday about all of these things. I don't want your hearts to be broken. So be encouraged that the thing that keeps you up at night, whatever that is, that you're hesitant to deal with and work through, you may not have the skills and abilities, or even the logistics or whatever, like you can't wrap your head around. But if you will take that first step of obedience and say, yes, okay, God, what does this look like? He will get you to the next step. And there are intentional things that you do need to do. I put myself in front of other women who had interior design businesses, and what ended up happening, and this is when I was just mulling it over. What ended up happening is they shared, and because the first question I would ask is, did you go to school for this? Because I was really stuck on not having those credentials. And every woman I met with was self-taught. So the women that God was connecting me with were to encourage and bring and like get rid of the fear that was keeping me back. So if you are thinking about starting a business, just find, and I was finding them on like Nextdoor. They were one woman was posting that she needed an assistant, a design assistant. So I thought, well, I'm going to talk to her, and it's not really about a design assistant. I just kind of want to pick her brain. And I ended up having many conversations with this woman to help me just kind of get my business going. And she was so encouraging. She was like, you just need one client. That's all you need. And you'll figure it out. Or if you are struggling to grieve something, and maybe it's the loss of someone, or maybe it's something else, find someone who has grieved and is vulnerable enough about it to talk with, and ask them how you get started. I mean, social media, people are gushing left and right. You can find somebody. If you're in a church, you could talk to a pastor, they'll connect you with someone. I also joined small business association nonprofit called SCORE, which is a mentoring program, totally free, to small businesses. So they can connect you with a mentor that will help you kind of walk through some of the scary stuff too. It is going to mean having some probably uncomfortable conversations with people. But if someone is already being open, like me, I'm already being open about my grief and the stuff that I'm going through, they don't mind having a conversation like that with you. And if they say no, I mean, who cares? Like, try it again. And I don't want to minimize the rejection that might bring up in you, because I know that hurts too. But if it is pervasive enough to keep you up at night, you think about it all the time. If we're talking about a business, you have the talent or the means to acquire the talent that also coincides with the passion. You know, you want to make sure that you have both of those things.
Mm.
Then the how will it will come. It will come. So I would just say start having conversations with people, which was the hardest part for me. Really
Yeah.
was. Just start having conversations with people.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. Well, before we go, I want to know if you're willing to share something that you're struggling with, because I really believe that none of us have arrived. And the older I get, the more I see that, especially within myself. And um, we're all wrestling with something. And is there something that you're wrestling with that you're okay sharing?
Mhm.
Because it may resonate with some of us.
Yeah. I think I made kind of a brief mention of this around the business plans tied to quarantine and COVID and all that. So, one of the other things that I've done over the last 4 years before the end of the year is ask God for a word for the next year, just a single word. And so, my word for 2020 that I got in like October of last year was tenacity, which I knew was not good. Like, gonna need to be tenacious because things are gonna get hard. And
Yes.
I thought that was personal, and it is personal, but it's also global and environmental and everything else. So as you start, so my struggle this year has been believing the promises and the plans that were given to me before this year started, and
Mm,
that they do not change irrespective of what's happening around me. So every conversation I had with the Lord around, are you sure this is not, this seems reckless? And he always just kind of laughs and it's like the plans don't change. The plans don't change. After we do it, there may be new plans, but the original directive does not change. So if you are questioning what you know to be true and you are certain that it came from a reliable source, just keep going. Just stick to the plan and keep going. It will become a self-fulfilling prophecy if you give up now. Like it will fail. So don't, just keep going. That's been the main struggle. The other struggle has been being a mom right now. I think anyone who's a mom is struggling with that too. Protecting our kids from long-term damage, and are they learning everything they need to learn? Are they safe physically? Is Are they interacting with the right people? Are they not interacting with the right people? Should I take them to this back to sports? Should I not? And moms, like, we take care of stuff like that. So I've really been struggling with fear around my kid,
mm,
and some very personal, very difficult things have happened in his life. Even as recently as this last week, and the conversation that God had to have with me very lovingly was, if you get in the way of what I want to do in this situation, you are going to do a great disservice to yourself and to your son, because what I want to do through this is far more important and far bigger than you stepping in and doing it yourself. So for moms that are really struggling with fear, number one, we know that that's not from Christ. That doesn't come from him. So we need to reject it as much as we can. But the other thing is really leaning to God and ask him what he wants to do for your children right now in this season. I think there's so much sweetness that's come out of it too. The time I've been able to spend with my kid has, I mean, this is unprecedented. We'll never have this back, I hope, right? Just ask God what he wants to do in their lives and in yours during, like, just one of the strangest times we will probably ever live through in our life.
yes. Um, I can relate. Just
Yeah.
the um, pandemic for us, my son has asthma and we
Mhm.
just want to be careful. And so they have not been to a restaurant or a grocery store since spring break. I go shop or my husband will, but we haven't taken them. Uh, we did take them to our little library. That's the size of my living room and dining room. I'm like, okay, that's small enough. But I know, just trusting and moving forward in such uncertain times.
Yeah.
And also just feeling like, okay, I'm doing what's best for my child and
Mhm.
not I'm stepping out into this decision from a place of fear.
Right.
Yeah, I've had a lot of those thoughts. And okay, where am I right now? Am I coming from a healthy place? I'm not. All of these other thoughts. Um, well, I want everyone to be able to find you. So, what's all of the places where you can be found? I know you're you have your blog and your business and the foster care. So, whatever you want to share, where
Yeah.
people can find you and follow you.
So the blog is kerrionpurpose.com, Kerri on purpose.com. Our business website is livingbeautifuldecorating.com, and we are on social media at living.beautiful.decorating. And our foster care nonprofit website is choseenones.org. So if you are a Dallas Fort Worth based adoptive or foster family, please set up an appointment and let us help you out. We also have social media Facebook groups that it's an incredible community of support and information, because that it is a struggle and it is a hard process, as you know. So we're here to support in any way we can.
Well, thank you so much, Kerri, for doing
Thank
this.
you for facilitating this platform. This is awesome.
And we will see you guys next time.
Bye.